The wind cut through my cardigan like knives as I stumbled down the shoulder of Route 7, my breath coming out in ragged white clouds. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep my arms wrapped around myself. Behind me, somewhere in the darkness, I could still hear the echo of my son's voice shouting, "Get out!" before the door slammed shut and the porch light went dark. My own son, the boy I'd raised, sacrificed everything for. He'd just thrown me out of what used to be my home, onto the street, at 62 years old, in the middle of a February snowstorm. I want to say I was numb, that the cold had taken over and I couldn't feel anything anymore. But that would be a lie. The cold was too real, the betrayal too fresh, and the pain in my chest too sharp. Every step away from that house felt like walking deeper into my own grave. My name is Margaret Sullivan, though everyone's always called me Maggie. For 40 years, I lived in that colonial house on Maple Street in Ridgebury, Connecticut. I raised 2 children there, buried my husband there. Well, not literally buried him there, but you know what I mean. Tom died 8 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. It happened so fast we barely had time to say goodbye. One day he was complaining about back pain. 3 months later he was gone. What I didn't know was that I'd be following him out the door soon enough. The snow was falling harder now, big wet flakes that stuck to my hair and eyelashes. My flats were soaked through. I hadn't even grabbed my coat when Nathan started yelling. I'd just been sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd fed him breakfast every morning for 18 years, trying to explain that I didn't understand why they needed me to sign over the deed to the house. That's when he exploded. "You're being selfish, Mom," he'd said, his face red with anger. "Jessica and I have been supporting you for months. We pay the bills, we buy the groceries. This house is too much for you to handle alone anyway. We're trying to help you, and you won't even meet us halfway." Jessica, his wife, had stood behind him with her arms crossed, nodding along like one of those bobblehead dolls. She'd moved into my house 3 years ago, right before Tom got sick, and slowly, piece by piece, she'd taken over. Rearranged my furniture, repainted my walls, replaced my dishes with her own. And I'd let it happen because Nathan seemed happy, and Tom and I didn't want to cause problems. But signing over the deed? That felt different. That felt final. "I just need some time to think about it," I'd said quietly. "Maybe I could talk to a lawyer, just to understand." That's when Nathan lost it completely. "A lawyer? You think we're trying to scam you? After everything we've done for you?" "You know what, Mom? If that's how you feel, then maybe you should just leave. Figure it out on your own." I'd stared at him, waiting for him to take it back. Waiting for my son, my baby boy, to remember who I was. But Jessica had put her hand on his shoulder and said, "Nathan's right, Margaret. Maybe some space would be good for everyone." Margaret. Not Mom. Not even Maggie. Just Margaret, like I was a stranger. And just like that, I found myself being ushered toward the door. I'd tried to grab my purse, but Nathan had blocked my way. "You can get your things later," he'd said. "Just go cool off." Cool off! I almost laughed at that now, my teeth chattering so hard I could barely keep my jaw closed. A car passed me, its headlights briefly illuminating the falling snow before disappearing around a bend. It didn't slow down. Why would it? Who picks up a crazy old lady stumbling along the highway in a snowstorm? I must have looked like something out of a horror movie. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How had I gotten here? 8 months ago, I was a wife. I had a home, a partner, a life that made sense. Tom and I had plans. We were going to travel, finally see all those places we'd always talked about. Italy, Ireland, the Grand Canyon. We'd saved for years. Then Tom got sick, and the medical bills started piling up. Insurance covered some of it, but not everything. Not the experimental treatments we'd tried in those desperate final weeks. Not the private hospice care. I dipped into our savings, then dipped again. By the time Tom died, most of it was gone. That's when Nathan and Jessica had started pushing this arrangement. "Move in with them," they said. "Pool our resources." It made sense financially. And at first, it had seemed like a blessing. I was drowning in grief, barely able to function, and they took care of everything. Paid the utilities, handled the bills, let me just exist. Except somewhere along the way, Letting them help had turned into giving up control. They'd opened a joint account with my checking account, just to make things easier, Mom. They'd taken over the mortgage payments. So you don't have to worry about it. And slowly, without me even realizing it, I'd become a guest in my own house. No, worse than a guest. Guests can leave. I stopped walking and leaned against a bare tree trunk, trying to catch my breath. My chest hurt. My feet hurt. Everything hurt. I could feel tears freezing on my cheeks. For a wild moment, I thought about just sitting down, right there in the snow, just letting the cold take over, letting everything fade away. It would be easier than facing whatever came next. Because what did come next? I had maybe $40 in my wallet, which was still sitting on my kitchen counter. I had no phone, it was charging in my bedroom. I had no car keys, no coat, no plan. I had nothing. A sound cut through my spiraling thoughts. A car engine, getting closer. I turned and saw headlights coming from behind me, moving slowly, as if the driver was searching for something. My first instinct was to hide. What if it was Nathan coming back? Or worse, the police? What would I even say? My son kicked me out, officer. Can you arrest him for that? But I was too tired to hide, too cold to care anymore. I just stood there, swaying slightly, watching as a silver Volvo sedan pulled up beside me and stopped. The passenger window rolled down, and I saw an elderly Asian woman behind the wheel, her white hair caught up in a neat bun, wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the dashboard lights. She must have been in her mid-70s, wearing a practical navy parka. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, not pity, exactly, but something deeper. Recognition, maybe. "Get in," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "You're going to freeze to death out here." I hesitated. Every stranger danger warning I'd ever given my children ran through my head. But then another gust of wind hit me, and I felt my knees buckle slightly. What choice did I have, really? I opened the door and climbed in. The car was warm, blessedly warm, and I immediately started shivering harder as my body realized how cold it had been. The woman reached into the back seat and pulled out a thick wool blanket, draping it over my shoulders without a word. We sat there for a moment in silence, the only sound, the gentle hum of the heater, and the soft patter of snow on the windshield. I waited for her to ask what had happened, to demand an explanation, but she didn't. She just put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road. "There's a diner about 10 miles up," she said. "We'll get you warmed up and figure out what's next." "I don't have any money," I whispered, the words barely audible. "Did I ask if you had money?" I looked at her more closely. Her profile was strong, her hands steady on the wheel. She drove carefully but confidently, like someone who'd been navigating New England winters for decades. "Why are you helping me?" I finally asked. She glanced at me briefly, and I saw something flash in her eyes, pain, maybe, or memory, because 30 years ago, someone stopped for me when I was walking along a road in the middle of winter. I had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. A stranger showed me kindness when I needed it most, changed my whole life. She paused. "I'm just paying it forward." "I'm Maggie," I said, pulling the blanket tighter around myself. "Dorothy. Dorothy Chen." The diner Dorothy took me to was one of those old-fashioned places with red vinyl booths and a checkerboard floor, the kind that's open 24 hours and smells perpetually of coffee and bacon grease. At this hour, I glanced at the clock above the counter and was shocked to see it was almost midnight. There were only a handful of customers scattered throughout. A trucker at the counter, a young couple in the corner booth, a waitress who looked like she'd seen everything twice. Dorothy guided me to a booth near the back and ordered us both coffee and soup without asking what I wanted. When the waitress left, she folded her hands on the table and looked at me directly. "You don't have to tell me what happened," she said, "but if you want to talk, I'm listening." And maybe it was the warmth finally seeping back into my bones, or the kindness in her voice, or just the simple fact that I had nothing left to lose, but I started talking. I told her everything. About Tom dying, about Nathan and Jessica moving in, about the slow erosion of my autonomy until tonight, when it had finally crumbled completely, about the deed they wanted me to sign, and how scared I'd been to say no. Dorothy listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making a small sound of understanding. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "Your son is financially abusing you," she finally said, her voice matter of fact, "and his wife is helping him do it. That's what this is. Abuse." I flinched at the word. "He's not. Nathan's not a bad person. He's just stressed. They have their own bills, and with the baby coming—" "Stop," Dorothy said gently but firmly. "I spent 35 years as a social worker specializing in elder care. I've seen this exact scenario hundreds of times. Adult children who view their aging parents as assets to be managed or burdens to be minimized. Sometimes it comes from genuine financial pressure, sometimes from greed, and sometimes from a toxic mix of both. But regardless of the motivation, the result is the same. The parent loses everything, their home, their independence, their dignity, while the children rationalize it as helping." "But they were helping," I protested weakly. "I couldn't have managed everything alone after Tom died. The bills, the house." "There's a difference between helping someone and taking over their life," Dorothy interrupted. "Helping would be sitting down with you, explaining the finances, giving you options, and respecting your decisions. What they did was isolate you, make you dependent, and then push you out the moment you tried to assert any control." The soup arrived, and I wrapped my hands around the warm bowl, staring down at it. She was right. I knew she was right. But admitting it meant admitting that my son, the boy I'd rocked to sleep and cheered for at soccer games and helped with homework until midnight, that boy had deliberately hurt me. "What do I do?" I whispered. Dorothy took a slow sip of her coffee. "First, you eat. Second, you come home with me for the night. Tomorrow, we start fixing this." "I can't impose." "You're not imposing. I'm offering. There's a difference." She smiled slightly. "I have a guest room that never gets used, and honestly, I could use the company. My husband died 5 years ago, and this big empty house gets lonely sometimes." I looked at this stranger across from me, this woman who'd stopped her car in a snowstorm and pulled me quite literally out of the cold. "Why?" I asked again. "Why are you doing this?" She set down her cup carefully. "I told you someone helped me once. What I didn't tell you was why I needed help. 30 years ago, I was married to a man who made my life hell. Controlled every penny, criticized everything I did, isolated me from my friends and family. One night, after a particularly bad fight, he threw me out. It was winter, like tonight. I walked for hours, convinced my life was over. Then, a woman named Ruth stopped her car and picked me up. She was 75 years old, drove an old Buick, and wore the tackiest Christmas sweater I'd ever seen. Dorothy's eyes were distant, remembering. Ruth took me to her house, fed me, let me sleep in her spare room, and the next day, she helped me make a plan. She connected me with a lawyer, a therapist, a women's shelter that helped me get back on my feet. She even hired me to help care for her husband, who had Alzheimer's, which gave me income while I was rebuilding. Ruth didn't just save my life that night, she showed me what it looked like to truly help someone, to empower them, not control them. "What happened to her?" I asked. "She died 10 years ago, but before she passed, she made me promise something. She said, 'Dorothy, you've got to keep paying it forward. Keep your eyes open for someone who needs what you needed.' So that's what I do. I volunteer at the senior center. I drive for Meals on Wheels, and sometimes, on winter nights, I drive routes where I know people might be in trouble." She looked at me directly. "I wasn't out here by accident, Maggie. I was looking." I felt tears start again, but this time they were different. Not hopeless tears, but something else. Relief, maybe, or gratitude, or just the simple recognition that I wasn't alone. We finished our soup in comfortable silence. Then Dorothy paid the bill, refusing my half-hearted offer to wash dishes or something to work it off, and we went back out into the cold. The snow had stopped, leaving everything covered in a clean white blanket that made the world look fresh and new. Dorothy's house was a neat Cape Cod in Danbury, about 20 minutes from the diner. As we pulled into the driveway, she said, "Before we go in, I want to be clear about something. You can stay here as long as you need. Days, weeks, months, it doesn't matter. But you're not going to be a guest. You're going to be a person figuring out their next chapter. That means you have autonomy here. You make your own decisions. You come and go as you please. This is a place to heal and plan, not another cage. Understood?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. The guest room was simple but comfortable. a double bed with a handmade quilt, a dresser, a window overlooking the backyard. Dorothy brought me some clothes to sleep in and a new toothbrush. "Try to get some rest," she said from the doorway. "Tomorrow's going to be a big day." But I couldn't sleep. I lay in that unfamiliar bed, in that unfamiliar house, and stared at the ceiling. My mind kept replaying the night's events like a horror movie on repeat. Nathan's angry face, Jessica's cold eyes, the door slamming, the snow. And beneath all of that, a deeper question. What now? I was 62 years old. I had no job. I'd stopped working when Tom got sick. I had minimal savings. My credit was probably a mess because Nathan had been handling everything. I had no car, no home, no clear path forward. But I also had something I hadn't had in months. A choice. Dorothy had given me that. Not by solving my problems, but by creating space for me to solve them myself. As the first light of dawn started creeping through the curtains, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be a victim. I wasn't going to let Nathan and Jessica take everything Tom and I had built. I was going to fight back. Not out of revenge, though there was definitely some of that, but because I deserved better. I'd spent 40 years taking care of others. Maybe it was time to take care of myself. The smell of coffee woke me around 8. I found Dorothy in the kitchen, scrambling eggs and toasting bread. She'd already set out a mug for me, with cream and sugar on the side. "How do you know I take cream and sugar?" I asked. She smiled. "You had 2 creams and 1 sugar at the diner last night. I pay attention." Over breakfast, we made a plan. A real plan, with steps and timelines and clear goals. Dorothy pulled out a legal pad and started making lists. "First priority," she said, "is getting you some resources. Do you have any accounts that Nathan doesn't have access to?" I shook my head. "He's on everything. Joint accounts for convenience." "Okay. So today, we go to the bank and open a new account in just your name. Do you have your social security card and driver's license?" "They're in my purse." "At the house." Dorothy made a note. "We'll need to get those. But first, the bank. We can get temporary documents if needed." She looked up. "Do you receive Social Security?" "Yes." "About $1,800 a month. And where does that money go?" "Into the joint account." "Not anymore, it doesn't. Today, we redirect that to your new account." She made another note. "What about Tom's pension? Did he have one?" "Yes, from the school district. He taught history for 30 years. Survivor benefits?" I nodded slowly. "I think so." But Nathan said. He said he was handling it. I never actually saw the paperwork. Dorothy's expression darkened. "We're going to find out exactly what happened to those benefits. I have a lawyer friend who specializes in elder law. She'll know what to look for." We spent the morning laying groundwork. Dorothy drove me to the Department of Motor Vehicles, where I explained that my documents were currently inaccessible and requested replacements. The woman behind the counter was sympathetic and expedited the process. By noon, I had a new license. Next, we went to a bank I'd never used before. Dorothy came in with me, which helped because I was shaking again, though this time from anxiety rather than cold. The banker was a pleasant woman named Teresa, who listened to my situation without judgment and helped me open a new checking account. "Now," Teresa said, "about redirecting your Social Security payments. You'll need to contact them directly, but I can give you the forms." Dorothy leaned forward. "What about fraud protection? If someone has been accessing her accounts without proper authorization?" Teresa's expression became more serious. "We can definitely set up alerts and freezes. And if you suspect financial abuse, I'd recommend filing a report with Adult Protective Services." The words financial abuse again. This time, I didn't flinch. I just nodded. By the time we left the bank, I had a new account, a temporary debit card, and a thick folder of paperwork. My head was spinning, but in a different way than last night. Last night, I'd been drowning. Today, I was swimming. Maybe not gracefully, and maybe not toward a clear destination yet, but at least I was moving. "Next step," Dorothy said as we got back in her car, "is the hard part." "What's that?" "Going back to your house to get your things." My stomach dropped. "I can't face them." "You don't have to go inside. We're going to call the police and request a civil standby. They'll escort you to retrieve your essential belongings. Nathan and Jessica won't be able to stop you or intimidate you with officers present." That seems so dramatic. Dorothy gave me a long look. Maggie, your son threw you out of your house in a snowstorm. That's dramatic. Making sure you can safely retrieve your identification documents, medication, and clothing? That's just practical. She was right. Again. We made the call from her house, and 2 hours later, a Ridgebury police officer met us at the end of Maple Street. Officer Martinez was in his 40s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Ma'am," he said, "I understand you need to retrieve some belongings from a residence where you feel unsafe." I explained the situation as simply as I could. He listened, taking notes, and then nodded. "I'll accompany you inside. You can take whatever personal belongings you need. If there's any dispute about ownership, we can sort that out later, but basic necessities, clothes, medications, documents, those are clearly yours." Nathan's car was in the driveway. My heart hammered as we walked up the front steps. Officer Martinez knocked firmly on the door. Nathan answered, and his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, then anger. "Mom, what's going on? Why are the police here?" "I'm here to get my things," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Jessica appeared behind him. "This is ridiculous. Margaret, if you'd just been reasonable—" "Ma'am," Officer Martinez interrupted. "Miss Sullivan has a right to retrieve her belongings. We can do this cooperatively, or I can make some phone calls and we can do it officially. Your choice." The look Nathan and Jessica exchanged told me everything I needed to know about their plans. They hadn't expected me to come back, certainly not with police escort. They'd thought I'd just disappear. "Fine," Nathan said tightly. "Get your stuff and go." The next hour was surreal. I moved through my house, Tom's, and my house, gathering things while Officer Martinez stood nearby, and Dorothy helped me pack. My clothes, my photos, Tom's wedding ring, which I'd kept in my jewelry box, our wedding album, the quilt my mother had made, my laptop, which I'd barely used in months but which was legally mine. In Tom's office, I found files, financial files, and as I flipped through them, my blood went cold. There were documents about his pension showing survivor benefits of over $3,000 a month, money I'd never seen. There were statements from accounts I didn't know existed. There was even a life insurance policy I'd forgotten about. "Dorothy," I said quietly, and she came over. I showed her what I'd found. Her jaw tightened. "Take all of it. Every document. We'll need them." "That's my father's private office," Nathan protested from the doorway. "You can't just—" "These are financial documents with my name on them," I said, finding strength I didn't know I had. "They're mine." Officer Martinez stepped between us. "The documents appear to have Mrs. Sullivan's name. She's entitled to copies at minimum." I packed everything into a box. Bank statements, insurance policies, the deed to the house, which I noticed had never actually been transferred, despite Nathan's demands. Tom had put the house in a trust before he died, with me as the primary beneficiary. Nathan couldn't have forced me to sign it over even if I'd wanted to. He'd been lying about that too. By the time we finished, I'd filled Dorothy's car with boxes and bags, my whole life condensed into a sedan's worth of belongings. As we prepared to leave, Nathan grabbed my arm. "Mom, wait. We can talk about this. I was just stressed last night, you know how it is. Come back inside, we'll work it out." I looked at his hand on my arm, then up at his face. For just a moment, I saw my little boy again, the one who'd crawled into bed with us during thunderstorms, the one who'd cried when his hamster died. But that little boy was gone, replaced by a man I barely recognized. "Let go of me, Nathan." "Mom, let go." He released my arm, and I walked to Dorothy's car without looking back. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Dorothy's lawyer friend, Angela, took my case and immediately filed for a restraining order against Nathan and Jessica, citing financial abuse and forced removal from my home. We documented everything: the joint accounts they'd opened without fully explaining them, the pension benefits they'd been collecting and keeping, the life insurance payout that should have come to me but somehow ended up in an account I couldn't access. Angela was fierce. "This is textbook elder financial abuse," she said during our first meeting. "Your son has been systematically stealing from you while making you feel like you should be grateful for his help. We're going to fix this." But the legal process was slow. Meanwhile, I had to figure out how to actually live. My redirected Social Security hadn't kicked in yet. I had no income. I was dependent on Dorothy's generosity, which made me deeply uncomfortable despite her repeated assurances that she was happy to help. "I need to work," I told her one morning about a week after I'd moved in. "I can't just sit here." "What did you do before Tom got sick?" Dorothy asked. "I was a hospice volunteer, and before that, when the kids were young, I did medical billing from home." Dorothy's eyes lit up. "Medical billing, that's perfect. The senior center where I volunteer is looking for someone to help with their administrative work. It's part-time, but it's something. I don't know if I'm qualified anymore. It's been almost 20 years. You're qualified enough. And more importantly, you need structure and purpose. Come with me tomorrow. Meet the director." The senior center job was perfect in ways I hadn't expected. The director, a warm woman named Patricia, hired me on the spot to work 20 hours a week, managing their billing and insurance claims. The pay wasn't much, $15 an hour, but it was mine. Money I was earning, not money someone was giving me out of pity. But more than that, the center gave me community. I met dozens of other seniors who were navigating their own challenges. Widows and widowers, people dealing with health issues, people who'd been swindled by family members or predatory companies, people who were just lonely. There was Ruth, who came to the center every day for lunch because cooking for one felt too sad. Margaret, we called her Marge to avoid confusion, who'd lost her sight to macular degeneration and was learning to navigate the world all over again. And Frank, a Korean War veteran who spent most afternoons in the common room teaching anyone who'd listen how to play chess. These people became my friends, my support system, my reminder that I wasn't alone in struggling with aging in America. Meanwhile, Angela was building my legal case. The more she dug, the worse it looked for Nathan and Jessica. They'd been siphoning off my money for over a year, living off Tom's pension and my benefits while making me believe I was the one being supported. They'd even taken out a home equity line of credit on the house, which they legally couldn't do without my signature, but they'd forged my name. "This is fraud," Angela said bluntly. "Clear, prosecutable fraud. We can pursue criminal charges if you want." Did I want that? I thought about it for days. Pressing charges against my own son felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But every time I wavered, I remembered that night in the snow. I remembered his hand on my arm, trying to manipulate me back into compliance. I remembered Jessica's cold voice calling me Margaret. "Yes," I finally told Angela. "File the charges." 3 months after Dorothy pulled over on that snowy highway, I stood in a courtroom while a judge reviewed my case. Nathan and Jessica sat across the aisle with their lawyer, refusing to meet my eyes. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s who looked like she'd heard every excuse in the book and believed none of them. The evidence was damning. Bank records, forged documents, testimony from my bank about suspicious account activity, a forensic accountant's report showing nearly $80,000 that Nathan and Jessica had taken over 18 months. The judge didn't hesitate. "I'm granting Mrs. Sullivan full control of her assets and property. The defendants are ordered to return all funds improperly obtained with interest. Furthermore, I'm issuing a permanent restraining order they are not to contact Mrs. Sullivan or come within 500 feet of her residence." Nathan stood up. "Your Honor, she's my mother. I have a right." "You have no rights here, Mr. Sullivan." The judge cut him off. "You abused your mother's trust, stole her money, and threw her out of her home in the middle of winter. If this were anyone other than a family member, you'd be facing more serious criminal charges. As it is, I'm recommending you both enter a financial abuse intervention program, and if you violate this order in any way, I will personally ensure you face the maximum penalties available." She looked at me. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm sorry for what you've endured. I hope you're able to rebuild your life." I was. Slowly, painfully, but I was. The first thing I did with my restored finances was repay Dorothy. She protested, but I insisted. "You gave me more than money," I told her. "You gave me my dignity back. Let me have mine." The second thing I did was decide what to do about the house. I thought about moving back, but every time I drove past it, all I could see was that closed door, that dark porch, that moment when my son chose money over me. I couldn't live there anymore, so I sold it. Got a good price, too. And with that money, plus the back benefits and insurance payout Angela had recovered, I had options I'd never imagined. I bought a small condo in Danbury, 3 blocks from Dorothy's house. 2 bedrooms, a little balcony, space that was completely mine. I furnished it slowly, deliberately, choosing every piece myself. No one else's taste, no one else's decisions, just mine. I expanded my hours at the senior center, started leading a support group for people dealing with elder abuse. Turns out, there were a lot of us, more than I'd ever realized, and something about my story resonated with people. I wasn't a perfect victim. I'd made mistakes, trusted the wrong people, let things go too far, but I'd also survived, and that mattered. Dorothy and I became inseparable. We had dinner together twice a week, volunteered together at the center, took a trip to Nova Scotia just because neither of us had ever been and we wanted to see the ocean. She was the friend I'd needed all along, the family I got to choose. One evening, about a year after that snowy night, Dorothy and I were sitting on my balcony watching the sunset. She'd brought over a bottle of wine, and we were slowly working our way through it. "I've been thinking," I said, "about something you said that first night, about Ruth making you promise to pay it forward. What about it? I want to do the same thing. What you did for me, I want to do that for someone else. But I don't know how. I don't have your training, your experience." Dorothy smiled. "You have something better. You have your story, and you have empathy born from experience. That's more than enough." She refilled our glasses. The senior center is always looking for volunteers for their outreach program. They check in on isolated seniors, help with errands, just provide companionship. You'd be perfect for it. So that's what I did. Once a week, I visited 3 different seniors who were homebound or isolated, brought them groceries, helped them sort through confusing medical bills, or just sat and talked. And sometimes, very rarely, I found someone who needed more than just a visit, someone who needed what Dorothy had given me, a way out and a way forward. Like Ellen, whose nephew was trying to force her into a nursing home so he could sell her house. Or Robert, whose caregiver was stealing his medication. Or Maria, whose daughter-in-law had convinced her to sign over power of attorney and was slowly draining her accounts. I couldn't save everyone, but I could be present. I could listen. I could connect them with resources, and sometimes that was enough. I never heard from Nathan again. He and Jessica moved out of Connecticut about 6 months after the judgment, and I heard through a mutual acquaintance that they'd divorced 2 years later. Part of me was sad about that, not for them, necessarily, but for the grandchild I'd never meet. Jessica had been pregnant when they threw me out. That baby would be in school now, and I'd never even know their name. But I couldn't dwell on that. Couldn't let their choices continue to hurt me. Tom used to say that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing, it just means you stop letting the past poison your present. I tried to live by that. Did I forgive Nathan? I don't know. Some days, I thought about that little boy in thunderstorms and felt a wave of grief for what we'd both lost. Other days, I remembered his hand on my arm and felt nothing but relief that he was gone from my life. Maybe forgiveness isn't a destination. Maybe it's just a direction you keep walking toward, even if you never fully arrive. It's been 3 years now since that February night. I'm 65, officially a senior citizen myself now. I still work at the center, though now I'm the assistant director, helping Patricia manage our expanding programs. We started a legal aid clinic, a financial literacy workshop, and a buddy system where volunteers check in on isolated seniors. All things I wish had existed when I needed them. Dorothy is 78 now and still going strong, though she's cut back on her Meals on Wheels driving. Her arthritis makes it hard to manage the steering wheel in winter. But she still volunteers 3 days a week, still keeps her eye out for people who need help, still pays forward what Ruth gave her all those years ago. Sometimes, on winter nights when it's snowing, I drive Route 7. I never stop. I don't have Dorothy's gift for spotting people in trouble, but I drive it anyway, a silent vigil for the woman I was that night, the woman who thought her life was over. Who couldn't imagine a future beyond that moment of betrayal? I wish I could go back and tell her, "You're going to make it. You're going to be okay. Better than okay. You're going to find friendship and purpose and a kind of peace you'd stopped believing existed. The life you're afraid of losing isn't the one you're meant to live anyway. The real one is waiting just ahead, in the headlights of a silver Volvo driven by a stranger who's about to become your family. But I can't go back. None of us can. All we can do is keep driving forward, keep our eyes open, and when we see someone shivering by the side of the road, we stop, we open the door, we say, "Get in. I'll help you figure out what's next." Because that's what Ruth taught Dorothy. And Dorothy taught me. And now I'm teaching others. That's how we survive. Not alone, but together. Not by pretending we don't need help, but by accepting it when it's offered, and offering it when we can. My name is Margaret Sullivan. People call me Maggie. And this is my story of how I lost everything and found myself, how a stranger's kindness on the worst night of my life became the foundation for the best years I'd yet to live. It's not the story I expected to tell at 62, but it's the one I've got, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.